Redditors, what was your craziest I need to leave now moment? And what did you later find out that you avoided? So I went to sleep for an extra shift I picked up earlier than normal. One of my really good friends really pushed for me to go with him to a party. I couldn't bring myself to have fun instead of getting sleep before a 12-hour shift. Well, it turns out he was planning to murder us. He wrecked his car into a tree right after leaving the party as his way out of this world. But he survived, and his dad found notebooks and poems about how he had planned all of this out, and this was his way of us living in the afterlife as bros. We stopped talking after that. Next story. Not me, but my husband. He used to work for a delivery company. He had an unshakable feeling one morning to a point that he couldn't bring himself to go into work. He just kept saying something was off, and he was going to trust his gut. Well, the guy who covered a shift delivered to a house where he got attacked by 2 dogs, and dispatch didn't pick up on the fact that his vehicle hadn't moved until 6 hours later. No one knew he was there, and by the time anyone came out to check on the guy, he was too far gone to be able to be saved. I still think about that. I feel so incredibly bad for the guy and his family. At the same time, I'm beyond grateful my husband did not go to work that day. It's a double-edged sword thinking about it from a moral standpoint. My husband, he quit that company the next day after they sent out a reminder email to the drivers about what had happened. And it very heartlessly was like, woof woof, remember to be mindful about our furry customers. They don't always know that we're bringing them good things. And I wish I was joking about that. Next story. So I was at a party and this guy pushed me up against a wall. He swore it was a joke, but I said, nah, I'm out. I'd already had bad vibes of him all night, and I called my boyfriend, all my friends were at the party and didn't want to leave, and asked him to pick me up because I was drunk. A week later, that guy was arrested for SA. Next story. Not a leave now moment, but something similar. I was living in my parents' apartment and they were both asleep. Both take medication to sleep, so they were out. As for me, I was about to go to sleep as well, so I turned my light off, but something told me to open my door. So I did, and I looked out into the hallway and saw flickering lights on the wall. I thought, that's weird, and almost ignored it, but instead I decided to check it out. Well, it turns out my mom put a candle in a plastic cup on top of an antique dresser. Of course, it started a fire. The flames were about 2 feet high, and the living room was filled with smoke already. Luckily, I was able to put it out and wake my parents to air out the apartment. And I think to myself sometimes that if I decided to just go to sleep, me and my parents both would have probably died to a house fire. Always trust your gut. Next story. One night I was waiting for the train when 4 guys walked up and I immediately got a bad vibe from them. I've been robbed once before on the train, and their demeanor reminded me of the guys who robbed me. Like, they were sizing me up and they were excited about it. So I stood there for a couple of more minutes reading my book and trying to look casual, then walked probably 3 or 4 car lengths down the platform. They stayed where they were but kept looking at me. When the train pulled up, I went to get in the front door of the car, glanced behind me, and saw them running down the platform towards me. Well, I got in the car and made my way to the back doors at the opposite end. A few seconds later, the 4 guys burst through the front doors and started looking around. I slipped out the back doors right as they were closing, before the guys spotted me, so I ended up safe on the platform while they were stuck on the train as it pulled away. When they looked out the window and saw me, they looked furious, and I booked it out of the station and took the bus instead. The next day, there was a news story that someone was robbed at knife point at the next stop right around that time, by 4 men who fit the description of the men I encountered. I'm so glad I listened to my gut and got out of that situation. In hindsight, it all happened so fast, and it's crazy that I reacted in exactly the right way to get myself to safety. Next story. My mom had something like this. It was back in 2003 when I was 12, my sister 10. Mom and Dad were planning a date night and they were going to have us kids go stay with our grandma and great-grandma for the night. Mom said she changed her mind last minute and instead they rescheduled and we all stayed home. Well, my grandma's house burned down that night, killing my great-grandma and severely injuring grandma and one of my uncles. Had my sister and I been there, we would have likely been in the same room with great-grandma or grandma, and one of both of us would have died. Next story. Okay, a little less dark than most comments here, but I thought I would share. I went to the zoo with some friends and my girlfriend. There was this huge bird cage, I forget the word, where you could walk in and see all the little colorful birds there. As we were walking, we noticed a dispenser where you could buy some seeds and sugary water to feed the birds. So we did, all fun and games, until my gut told me we had to leave. I took my girlfriend's hand and we made our exit, and 2 minutes later, so did my friends, who were now covered in bird poo. Okay, so is this going to be the happiest story throughout the whole video? There's a chance it might be. I'm also curious if we will get any stories about camping, because on Really Sparked, we've done a few camping videos, and there's like, I don't know, something happens in the woods. So I'm willing to bet money we might get a camping or a nature story, but let's see. Next story. So, years ago, I was hanging out with a couple of friends in the street. We had the idea to go to a certain club during the night. When we finally decided to start walking towards it, I got a strange feeling about it in my gut that I couldn't really understand or shake off. I told my friends that I wasn't feeling like clubbing that night, but they could go without me. My friends tried to convince me to go for a bit, but I refused. They gave up and said that we could rather hang out at a friend's house. Well, later that same night, while we were still hanging out, the news reported that there was a shootout at the club, apparently gang-related, and there were bystanders critically wounded by stray bullets. I remember my friends looking at me with this pale look while I was also very moved by this. I had never experienced something of this sort. Neither something like that has repeated, but I'm thankful that I listened to the feeling and that my friends decided to go with me somewhere else. Who knows what could have happened? Next story. Not me, but my dog. I was having a little after the bar party at my apartment that was right next door. Somehow, in a drunken shuffle, my friends disappeared, and I was left with this dude that I didn't know. Well, he was being nice, and we were chatting while waiting for the others to come back. I offered him a drink and got one myself as well. I thought he seemed odd, so I was texting my friends to hurry up. But then, my sweet, timid, but large dog started barking and growling at this man like I'd never heard before or since. Well, I told the guy to get the hell out, and when he got irritated, I said if the dog says you're out, you get out. He tried to argue, and I had to shout him out. Then 10 minutes later, I hit the floor and crawled to the bathroom to puke. I slept for ages. I never puke when I drink, and I never get that drunk. I thought I'd had my drink in my sight that whole night, but I can only assume he slipped me something. My dog was 4 at the time and is now 11, and I'm so glad I listened because his instincts definitely saved me from something awful. Next story. I was taking the South Bend Red in Chicago during wintertime a few years ago, and 3 people wearing balaclavas entered my car, which was pretty full already, and 2 were standing in front of one exit, and the other guy was standing in front of the other. I saw them scan the people in the car in my peripheral vision. Then the guy standing alone looked over at the other 2 and then gave them an okay nod. I felt like something was about to go down, so I got off at the next stop and walked the rest of the way home. Fortunately, was not stopped by one of the guys when I passed them, probably because other people were in the car. But about 10 minutes later, I got a ping from the Citizen app saying something along the lines of robbery shooting at the next station I was going to. And I passed the next station on the walk back and saw tons of police officers along with an ambulance parked at the entrance. Next story. I used to be an altar server for the church. The foster family I was with at the time attended, and they were Catholic, real strict, small rural ranching town. The priest that had been there basically forever passed away. He was well into his 90s, and they went through a temporary few ones before they got one that would stick around longer. He was younger and seemed really interested in the youth of the church, trying to set up youth groups and stuff like that. He got really interested in foster kids, or those living in group homes and whatnot in particular, and since mine was heavily involved with the church, part of how I got roped into being a server, and I was there a lot. He took a lot of notice of me. Well, he kept trying to get me to have private Bible rap sessions with him, whatever that meant, and said he wanted to give me more personal guidance, saying I would need it since I didn't have the support of a biological family and all of that. Something he apparently said to other kids in similar situations. By that time, though, I'd honed pretty good instincts for people who were off, and this guy sent all my alarm bells ringing. I tried to be polite when in front of anyone else, but I made it absolutely clear to my foster parents of the time that I would absolutely not tolerate being anywhere near him in any more than necessary, and there was no way in hell I was going to be alone with him, and I would get violent if I needed to. And they knew I meant it too from previous incidents, so they never tried to force it. Found out many years later, after I was an adult, from a furry comedian talk show to the ranting Gryphon, of all places, that the priest who had skeeved me out so much had been arrested for the essay at gunpoint of a little boy, and actually trying to hire someone to kill that child after the kid had told people what had happened to him. Apparently, the guy he tried to hire to do the job said he couldn't do it, but knew someone who could, and he contacted the FBI, who set up a sting with an agent pretending to be someone who was available for hire. And when the priest tried to hire him, he got arrested. The church tried to cover it all up, of course, and I'm pretty sure the church is still there and pretends nothing happened. I don't know what his final sentence was, but whatever it was, I hope he's been torn apart and can never harm anyone ever again. I just wish that he had never gotten the chance to hurt any kid, and knowing that it wasn't me doesn't really bring me any feeling of relief because I know I would have made an entire Broadway musical out of it, whether people believed me or not. And at the very least, that might have spared other kids' experiences that I'd already dealt with anyway. Maybe I would have even had a chance to go for his throat, who knows. But apparently, my instincts that he was bad news, no matter how friendly and with it he acted, were spot on. Next story. So not really leave now, but when I was in my final year of high school, I planned to return my books to the library near my school a couple of towns further on Saturday. I told some friends about it, so maybe we could hang out afterwards. Well, the morning of, I really didn't want to go and didn't want to come out of bed, so decided to just go later. At that time, I was an early riser, and this was something I would normally almost never do. Also, I loved going to the library. An hour later, some friends kept trying to call me, and one was even at my door. Apparently, the train I was supposed to take had derailed, and several people had died. Next story. It was an after party purely because my friend wanted to bang one of the dudes. I waited in the living room, first full of people, but dwindling down to eventually just 2 guys and me. Friend has yet to emerge from random hookup in the bedroom. It was fine for a bit, and then I caught a glance between the two, and it was like everything turned slow motion for a second, and I literally dragged my friend off of a guy's bed, and we got the hell out of there. One of those dudes eventually served time for the SA and murder of his girlfriend. You know what, folks? Every now and then, it's actually a good thing to cock block your friends. Who would have thought? Or for girls to wussy protector, but replace it with a P. But anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. Good friend. Thank goodness they got out of there. Next story. So at first I thought I was being weird, overly sensitive. I stopped by this local small grocery store because I needed some milk and mayonnaise, but didn't want to go to my regular store that was much busier and further from my house. Well, this guy kept appearing at the end of the aisle I was in. To say he looked at me in a creepy way would be a bigger understatement than saying the surface of the sun is kind of warm. And then, after 3 times of these looks, I checked out and left. And I saw him in the parking lot. He just stood there watching me get in my car. Unfortunately, I didn't learn my lesson so quickly. I went to that store 2 more times when I needed just an item or two, and that man was there each and every time. I was so creeped out by this guy, I stopped going to that store. I thought I was being crazy, but I tell you, the look in that guy's eyes was so scary. Like he was devouring me with his eyes or something. Didn't think about that guy until almost a year later when I saw him on the TV. He had just been arrested. Turns out his name was Gary Ridgway. He worked on the street I lived on about 5 blocks down, and Gary Ridgway was the Green River Killer. Next story. Not me, but my then roommate was a school janitor. He usually left for work before I got up, and I was surprised to see him out in the living room playing Xbox when I knew he had to work that day. Apparently, he just had a terrible feeling that something was going to happen that day, and he called in sick. I thought he was being an idiot, but when the news hit later that day that there had been a school shooting with multiple casualties, I was stunned. And I don't think science has any kind of explanation for that. It's one thing if he was regularly slacking off and something happened on an off day, but I'd never seen him just up and miss work for any reason, never mind just having a bad feeling. Next story. This was honestly really obvious in hindsight, but I was acting naive and tipsy when traveling alone, 26F, in Lisbon after dinner. On my walk to my hostel, a guy stopped me and said I looked really familiar, asking me where I was from, etc. I was in a great mood, so we get to chatting, and I noticed another guy with his hood up in the background pacing back and forth, and I made eye contact with him. He quickly looked away but was lingering, and I realized, oh, I'm about to get robbed, so I politely cut the conversation short and went on my merry way. Next story. Sitting in an otherwise empty living room at a house party after most of the other guests had left and everyone else is upstairs. 2 guys, one was the host whom I hadn't met before, and the other was his friend, and the older brother of one of my high school friends, who clearly didn't know who I was, came over and sat on either side of me, chatting and being friendly. The host is offering me weed. At the time, I was in a couple of bands, and so the host started telling me about his recording studio in the basement, offering to show it to me. I tell him maybe later on, but he's very persistent, and so is his friend. I suddenly feel very uncomfortable with the whole encounter. So I tell them I need to use the washroom and bolt upstairs to find my other friends, who coincidentally tell me they are ready to head out. So I go with them. The 2 guys see me as I'm heading out the door and ask, "Are you leaving?" And I just tell them, "Yep, sorry," and take off, leaving them looking disappointed and confused. At the time, I felt like I was just being a paranoid weirdo, But weeks later, I find out from my ex that the host of this party is a known creep who often preys on young women, offering them drugs and inviting them to tour his studio, then assaulting and SAing them after getting them alone. Next story. Went on a first date with a really attractive lady and everything was going great. Honestly, nothing about the date seemed weird or out of place. We went back to her place and we were about to hook up when, for some reason, I just felt like I needed to get out of there. Couldn't tell you why. Craziest feeling especially when I really wanted to hook up. I got off the couch, told her it was an amazing date, and left, and at that point I would have probably gone on a second date and just attributed it to weird vibes. But the next day she calls me and we're talking and she starts asking if we're now a couple. Straight up, are we boyfriend and girlfriend? And I started laughing thinking it was a joke, and then she started crying on the phone asking why can't we just be together, and then starts screaming that I always do this to her. No lie, almost verbatim, she says to me, "Why do you always do this to me? I'm so tired of you doing this. Why can't we just be together?" Then proceeds to text me calling me the biggest piece of crap that she'd ever met, the worst boyfriend ever, and that she'll warn other women never to date me. And all I could think about was that this was a murder waiting to happen. I had known her for less than 24 hours. P.S. I know this was just a bad date, but nothing about the date indicated she was unstable or why I immediately felt I had to leave. Next story. Not me, but my dad. He was in Vietnam from 67 to 69 with a brief respite in Germany in between tours. There was one time when his company had completed a patrol and they were waiting near the LZ pickup point for pickup the following morning. Despite not having enemy contact during the patrol, he ordered his entire company to move away from their LZ and reset the perimeter, redig, hasty fighting positions, etc., probably about 1K from their initial position. Well, their old position wound up getting mortar/artillery fire throughout the night, and my dad is 100% convinced that if they would have stayed in their initial position, that his whole company would have died. So this kind of counts as like a camping nature story. Vietnam's got the jungles, so I'm putting this in not the win column, but the half-win column. I called it kinda. Anyway, next story. So when I was 13, my aunt took me to the beach one time. It was a little later in the day and pretty empty, just me and her. Not too far out, and I found a sandbar. The water went from knee-deep to suddenly not being able to touch the ground. But I went out further and found a second sandbar where I could touch the ground again. I kept diving under the water to try to feel around for sand dollars, but I noticed a faint buzzing that started getting louder and louder and louder. There were no boats or anything, and I could only hear it when my head was under the water, but it sounded like something big was next to me, and super close. It was starting to weird me out, so I looked back at my aunt, who was standing next to two other people, frantically waving at me and screaming, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. And I just knew right then and there, don't splash, don't panic, and move slow. I basically tried to keep the pace of just walking back even when my feet couldn't touch the ground. The buzzing I was hearing turned out to be sharks circling me. Two joggers noticed the fins and told my aunt they weren't dolphins and that they were getting closer to me. My aunt was pissed I took so long getting out, but I told her I felt like it would have been an awful idea to start kicking and splashing, and something was telling me to go as slow as possible. Next story. Was working at home with the blinds open. Some light rain was coming through, but I was deep into working on a project. I had headphones in. Didn't think anything of the rain. 1 minute it was fine, and the next minute I glanced towards the window and noticed the window was completely whited out. For like half a second I was like, huh? And saw a gray blob dancing around it. My stomach dropped, and I had this instant feeling of, oh man, get the hell away from this window. I jumped and ran to the bathroom. It was a damn tornado. The gray blob was a huge tree. Next story. Was out to the clubs on Halloween night, and it was around 1 a.m., and my partner and our fam and friends decided to head out. Before we did, we walked a little down the club street and back. Lots of costumes to see, and the street had lots of different stores, tattoo shops, clubs, bars, and restaurants that were open. But anyway, my partner asked if we should walk the other way or just head out, and for some reason, when I looked at the street, I thought to myself, this would be a great place for a shooting. Big crowds, nowhere to run, and that random thought gave me chills. So I refused and made us go leave. They didn't really want to leave, but I told them I had a bad feeling. We got our Uber within 5 minutes, and as we were driving away, we passed several police cars with the lights and sirens on full blast, speeding to the strip clubs. And we ended up eating pizza and falling asleep around 4 a.m. When we woke up the next day, our phones were filled with mixed text messages and calls because it turns out we just missed a shooting. We had posted to our social media about being at the club where the shooting happened in front of the club we went to. We had left around 1:40 a.m. and the shooting happened at about 1:47 a.m. Such a bizarre thought to have, but it ended up saving us. I remember several people were shot, and I think 3 critically wounded. Then, the shooter plus one other person was dead. We missed it by minutes. Insanity. Next story. My dad ignored his instincts and almost died. He was in high school and worked at my grandfather's store when he wasn't at school. It was a Saturday in dove season, and he had the day to go off to go hunting. But when he woke up that morning, he knew something bad was going to happen. He called everyone that was supposed to work that day and asked if they also felt like something was wrong, and if they wanted him to take their shift. For some reason, he assumed that the bad thing was going to happen to someone else. Everyone told him he was being silly and to calm down and to enjoy his day off. So he packed up his truck and grabbed his dog and headed off. On the drive to the hunting area, his dog broke out of the carrier in the back of his truck, double cab, and jumped into his lap while he was driving. He ended up going off the road at 75 miles per hour and hit a tree. His skull had multiple fractures. His nose was crushed up into his sinuses, and his left eye was popped out of the socket just hanging there. He also had multiple broken ribs. Then he somehow, I guess because of shock, managed to get himself out of the wreckage and dragged himself to a nearby house. Very lucky there was one anywhere nearby. It's a very, very, very rural area where he almost gave a nice old lady a heart attack. She tried to get him into the house, but she had white carpet and my dad thought he was going to die anyway, so he refused to ruin her floor and passed out on her front porch. He then woke up in the hospital to a surgeon pulling a sheet off of his face and saying, "I can't do anything for him," before walking away. But what the surgeon meant was, "I'm not a plastic surgeon and he needs extensive facial reconstruction, so I can't do that." But what my dad thought is, damn, this dude really just said I'm going to die. But the next time he woke up was in a different hospital where he was sent into surgery and they mostly fixed his face. And he's all good now, for the most part. He does have some scars and stuff, but nothing too crazy. Well, that's my opinion, but I did have friends growing up that would refuse to come to my house because my dad's face scared them, but I really don't see what's so scary. Maybe because I grew up with him always looking like that he just looks normal to me? He does look different than he's supposed to. I don't look much like his current face, but I do look very, very similar to the picture of him at 17 right before he almost died. Next story. One of my friends was having issues with her roommate who was unstable and nitpicky. I always thought she was just kinda loud and didn't do chores and was generally a bad roommate, but didn't expect much else. Well, we were hanging out and her roommate came home and was just kinda silently smoldering. Usually, she would be loud and nitpicky, but she just wasn't. She walked by the room where we were playing some games and just stared at us for a bit before walking away. I immediately felt super uneasy about it and told my friend that we should go out somewhere and give her some space. But my friend said she was too tired and was just gonna take a nap. I told her that she should lock her door if she's going to do that, and she did as I was leaving. Later that night, I got a text message that her roommates were fighting and she had called the cops. She stopped texting after that. But I find out the next day that she had tried to break up their fight and got stabbed to death. I still can't believe I didn't push her harder to leave with me when I felt the vibe was off. She didn't deserve to die. Next story. I was in my science class writing notes and watching an experiment that we were doing. I got a feeling I should move over to a different part of the table, so I did. A couple of minutes later, the part I'd been standing in exploded in flame. The gas tap had been leaking and the gas cloud finally hit the Bunsen burner that we had going. Since no one was in that location, it was totally harmless and we just went on with the lesson after the teacher switched off the gas. Our science teacher never trusted our group with an open flame ever again, though. Next story. Not leave now, but more in the sense of just knowing it's a disaster. So, my mom suffered from uncontrollably high blood pressure since I could remember. Last couple of years, it got really bad, like 270 over 120 bad. Anyway, one night I woke up. I thought I heard a thud, but wasn't sure. Everything was dark and silent, and I just turned around and tried to go back to sleep. But something didn't let me. I got a bad feeling and got up. The hallway was empty, and I went to the bathroom at the end of it. It was pitch dark. I turned the lights on in the bathroom, and I saw my mom on the floor. She was conscious, and I remember asking her why she didn't use the lights. And in my half-asleep state, I thought she just stumbled in the dark. She said she didn't want to risk waking me up. She was thoughtful like that. Well, she got up and went back to bed. I asked her if I should call the ambulance, and I called them often that last year, but she said yeah, I should. But anyway, she had a massive heart attack and passed away half an hour later, while I was waiting for the emergency services who took their sweet time to arrive. I kept thinking for a long time after that if I had just went back to sleep like I wanted to, I would have found her on that cold, tiled floor in the morning. This way she could tell me what she felt was important, and I will never forget her last words. You know, When death comes knocking on your door, your gut knows. Next story. Okay, this one fits the category but will be different from the rest. Many years ago, I was in New Orleans with friends, eating beignets at Café du Monde, and a TV film crew is there for a piece on the place and films us in a brief and funny interaction. And the director was my age, cute, down to earth, and had a great sense of humor, so I was delighted when he invited to meet up for a drink that night. I accepted, and we had a great time. I really liked him, no creepy vibes at all, and he invited me back to his place in a way that felt comfortable and sweet, but I declined and went home even though I liked him, and we had fun, and I really did want to get to know him. It felt so random and weird to say no, but I just did, and it felt like I should just go back to my hotel, which I was sharing with my friends. So I did. I can't explain it at all since I really did like him, but it was like the universe said, not tonight, and I was weirdly at peace with that despite it making no sense. Again, he was cool about it and drove me back to my hotel room without trying to make a move. Like I said, I didn't understand my actions, but also overwhelmingly felt this was right. So I drifted peacefully off to sleep and woke up an hour or two later with horrible food poisoning. Not the beignets, don't worry, which my two friends also had. And thus commenced a vile and horrible night of us three friends puking and pooping our guts out for hours in a horrible brown round robin with one toilet between us. We three were and are like family and still laugh about it. But had I gone with him, that poor guy would have been stuck taking care of me all night. And it was so bad, he couldn't have even taken me back to my place once it started, as I would have befouled his car. I didn't feel sick at all when I said no to him, and all of his vibes were genuinely great, and I truly liked him. It really felt random, but also super clear that I should say no. And I gotta say, this instinct saved him, not just me, from a horror show that he did not deserve. I'm sure that he wondered what he did wrong, nothing, but has no idea of how lucky he was that I followed my gut before I had any physical clues that my gut was about to physically exit my body. Next story. When I had just turned 7 years old, my family and I were visiting extended family in Scotland. It was like 1982 and we'd traveled from New Zealand. It was normal then for children to be pretty free range. I had gone down the road by myself to the local shops and I was followed on the way back by a man. And he gave off the most malevolent and evil feeling despite doing nothing but walking behind me. I always remembered that so strongly. Well, I ran down the alley behind my aunt and uncle's house to hide because I didn't want to get caught at the front door where I might have to wait for someone to open the door. Well, years later, I saw an image of a man on an online news website. I think it was around 2010. I recognized that man. It was Peter Tobin, Scottish serial killer and sex offender. He was familiar with the area of Glasgow, and we'd been staying at that place, and he has been tied to a predator ring. Next story. When I was depressed and working 3 jobs to afford my studio apartment in California, I came across a seemingly harmless young man one night who said he had taken too many shrooms and got separated from his friends, needing help. He asked for a phone to make a call or to check his location relative to his house. I told him I was in the middle of an order and that if he stayed put, I could even take him home. When I say seemingly harmless, I really meant it. Dude was skinny, wearing a turtleneck, had a funny accent, and was genuinely embarrassed to be in the situation. Well, I end up coming back for the guy 20 minutes later and he's not there. Instead, I coincidentally run into him a few streets down, and when I offered him help, he said he was actually sobering up and found his way home. He asked if I smoked, I told him I did, and he offered to smoke me out. I knew I shouldn't, but I was depressed and lonely, so I said F it. So, first red flag was the guy not having a lighter. No biggie though, he said his house is down the street and he's got one there. At his house, we began talking about a variety of topics over the course of a couple of joints. We discussed religion and how we had some, went satanic, and is now all over the place. He talks about his wealth too, showing me very expensive clothes, a pair of pants that costs $8,000, etc. He talks about how his family was selling weapons to all types of countries and how he wasn't worried about being caught. Oh, he also mentions it's not actually his place, but he's staying with a friend, but nobody is home. Now, at this point, I'm thinking I should maybe get the F out, but I don't want this guy to think I'm a snitch or something, so I let him ramble some more. And he goes on about how he's done everything, been everywhere, has more money than he knows what to do with. He says more and more crazy crap, but the last thing he told me was so crazy that it broke my brain, and I forgot what he said leading up to it. But in this empty house, just him and me, with all nonchalance in the world, he says, I mean, I've even killed people just to know what it feels like. And to prove he's not kidding, he takes a pair of shoes worth hundreds of dollars and throws them as hard as he can against the wall. He then takes a Sharpie across the $8,000 pair of jeans. Naturally, while he's doing all of this, I'm looking to see if either door is locked so I could get the F out before this dude kills me or loses more of his crap. I stand up and I announce, "Okay, that might be enough for me tonight," and I hightailed it to the door. He asked if he said anything wrong or if he spooked me. Without looking back, I assured him he very much did. Once it was open and there was distance between us, I felt safe enough to turn around and say, "I have to ask, have you ever thought about therapy?" And I crap you not, he goes, "No, why?" And then I later find out that the homes he took to me were usually designated for the mentally ill, where clients and caretakers live together. Overall, super effing weird night. Next story. Finished up a workout at the gym with my then crappy and abusive boyfriend. I decided that day I would change the status quo. Instead of going to his truck and having our post-training meals and chatting or fighting, I stopped at my car and told him that I was just going to go home. He asked a few times to talk first and I refused to go to his truck. We sat in my car and we chatted for probably 3 minutes or so, and then we heard a loud screech and a crash. We couldn't see what was going on, but we saw a bunch of people running towards where his truck was parked. An elderly lady pressed the accelerate instead of the brake and accidentally flew her vehicle through his truck and another car, decimating the rear left of the car and the right middle to the front of his truck. She also wedged the front left of his truck under the front right of the truck parked on the other side and managed to push up all three up onto the walkway from curb height. The other truck smashed into a concrete planter in the lot. She was perfectly fine though, but 4 cars totaled. But where I would have been sitting though, had I followed the regular status quo, was entirely crushed up to the engine. I would have died. Next story. I was close to the front at a music festival 25 years ago. Not only was it my first big music festival, I was there with my schoolmates and no adult presence with us. Then, it was as the band was preparing to go on and start their set, the previous band was still playing on the stage next door, that I was starting to feel the crowd was different, and I didn't like it one bit. Sure, there was a bit more shoving and physicality. I experienced much worse at an earlier set though, but there was something else I can't describe. But my head was screaming to get out as quickly as possible. I was only a few rows from the front barricade so quickly and loudly asked to go over and out the side, and proceeded to watch the set from the back of the crowd. Typically, things got worse as the set progressed, and even though the band paused and attempted to calm the crowd down, a teenage girl later died in the hospital after being caught in the crush. Rest in peace, Jess. Next story. One time before Lyft or Uber, I was out at the bars with friends. We realized that we didn't have much cash between us, and the taxis in my town didn't take cards yet. Our first stop was at our friend's house who was a male. I ended up giving all of my cash to my female friend so she could get dropped off at her home. I figured I was safe because my male friend's female roommate was home, and also I could walk home from this place if I got uncomfortable. I walked into his house to hang out for a bit and possibly crash on the couch, but right when I stepped inside, I realized his female roommate was already asleep in her room. I was already feeling a little gut reaction, but I figured I would just sleep on the couch a bit before heading home. My house was only 2.5 miles away, but it was winter and I had lost my coat at the first bar we went to, so I wasn't that eager to walk. Well, I headed towards the couch and he cut me off and he said, "You can sleep in my bed. It will be comfier." And I said, "No, man, I'm good." But then he kept insisting and never once mentioned that he would be willing to take the couch and I could have the bed, which I didn't expect, but would have been a lot more convincing of his positive intent. But I just got that gut feeling. So I quickly turned and headed out of the apartment with "Good night, thanks for the offer." And I started walking and was feeling good about my decision when all of a sudden I felt myself in the headlights of a car. He was driving to come and get me and was shouting to assure me it was fine and I should just sleep over. I started running through the apartment complex trying to get away, but he was driving close behind. At this point, I'm clearly communicating with my body language that I'm not wanting any bit of this situation, and he's still driving fast while I'm going through the parking lot. I panicked and eventually ran through a grassy lawn area, but it was dark and I didn't see that it was actually a 10-foot retaining wall. I ended up running in midair like a cartoon and landed on the middle yellow line of the road below. The impact snapped my purse off its chain and shattered my phone screen. My tailbone felt like fire and my wrists were both in pain. I sat on the road for a second to catch my breath, but then I saw his headlights turning out of the apartment complex driveway, which was a bit up the road thanks to my shortcut. Well, I crawled on my hands and knees off of the road and got myself into the fairway of a golf course. I hid behind some bushes until he gave up and went home. Then I continued my 2.5-mile trek home in the dark on a cold 28-degree night with a broken phone and a broken tailbone and a tank top and leggings. Thanks to my broken phone screen, I had to guess where the buttons on my phone screen were to call my then boyfriend boyfriend. When I finally accomplished the phone call, I asked him to come pick me up because my night out had taken a weird turn, and I was injured. But he said to me, "No, I'm mad at you because you haven't checked in all night." And I explained that I had put my phone safely away in my purse because I had already lost my sunglasses and my coat at the bar. And I don't have a drinking problem, I just have an ADHD problem. And I begged him to be mad at me tomorrow, but please come get me tonight. And he refused. I made it home and shivered up under multiple blankets on my couch for 2 hours before finally falling asleep. Then in the morning, he tried to make me breakfast and act like nothing happened. Needless to say, I also ended up breaking up with that dude. Next story. Back when I was still in high school, my mom told me to take a day off of school because I would be going dress shopping with my uncle. He insisted and was pushy on me buying a bridesmaid dress because my sisters and I would be bridesmaids in his wedding the following day. So my sisters went to school and my uncle picked me up from our house to go to JCPenney at the mall. At first, everything was fine. I quickly picked out my dress and I figured he would just drop me off at home afterwards. He was super emotional, saying how excited he was to get married and everything. After we left the mall, he said that he'd need to go to my grandparents' house, and from there, we're going to pick up his friend from the airport, all while listing a bunch of other errands. At this point, I was feeling uncomfortable because this wasn't what I signed up for, and my gut feeling was telling me I needed to get to my grandparents' house ASAP. I thought we would stop by my grandparents first, but he kept stopping at the most random places and met with the most random people while I stayed on the car on high alert. He progressively smoked more weed and started driving more erratic while going on whole tangents about whatever came to mind. And by this point, I was tired and I wanted out. So I kept assertively telling him we needed to go to my grandparents' house and to drop me off there. Well, eventually, we did go there, and I immediately felt so much safer. He continued to drive and run around doing errands, and later on that night, my grandparents get a call. Police called to say he was at the mall near their house and had a mental break, started panicking, yelling, and waving a knife around, scaring everybody around. Thankfully, he didn't injure himself or others around him, but they did admit him to a nearby mental hospital. He had to reschedule his wedding out a couple of months, and his fiancée was concerned for him, as well as everyone else. All that said, I was very grateful I listened to my gut, and I was glad I was assertive enough to get out of that situation that day. Next story. Not quite leave now, but more so get away from them. This was around about 2001 or so. My now husband and I were living in a small tourist town, and one morning we get a call to say his beloved grandmother had unexpectedly died. Because where we were living was small and remote, we couldn't afford to fly to the funeral. So we made an elaborate plan that looked like this. Drive 6 hours to the nearest city, meet up with my sister-in-law who lived there, all three of us get a cheap flight to the other island where we'd meet up with her husband and my father-in-law, and then drive 8 hours to the small town where the funeral was. Well, I had a long day of work and got home late. I wanted us to sleep and leave early. Our flight was leaving at midday, and I just didn't want to drive at nighttime. But my now husband persuaded me to go, saying he would do all the driving, so we went, leaving at almost 10 p.m. I got very sleepy, so partway along, maybe 3 hours in, I tried lying down in the back seat for a nap. Didn't work, so I sat up again. And that was when I saw a pair of headlights behind us. They weren't speeding or driving erratically, but when I saw them, I had a huge sense of fear. I didn't want that car near me. I was this close to unbuckling and scrambling over into the front seat. That car just gave me the creeps. Eventually, they passed us and the feeling went away instantly. We pulled over and I got back into the front seat. No longer scared, I felt fine. Then right up until about 20 minutes later when we came across that car crashed into a bridge. One of the two guys in it had been thrown into the middle of the road. We stopped, called the ambulance, and gave CPR, but they both passed away. Next story. My car broke down in my hometown while my folks were away. I posted to Facebook if anyone could get me a lift. The first message I got was from a guy called George, a friend of a colleague of mine. At this time, I was 20. My work colleague was in his late 30s and an eccentric guy, 2 PhDs in chemistry, brewed his own moonshine, built his own armor, etc. Lots of people called him weird, but we got on perfectly well and happened to hang out at the same pub at the weekends. He then introduced my friends and I to George one weekend at the pub and jokingly said, "And people think I'm weird? Just be nice to him, I think he's had a tough time." From that moment I laid eyes on George, though, I got more than weird vibes. We all know a socially awkward person who has obviously been bullied and teased their whole life, but I didn't feel that way around George. I didn't feel empathy, I felt scared. George proceeded to be a bit awkward and overstep conversations with people. They all kind of ignored it though, or just jested and moved on to the next topic. I tried to do some digging and brought it up to my colleague, and I couldn't find him on Facebook, to which he replied, "Oh, he doesn't like to be looked up, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind sharing his profile with you. He likes you." Well, George was under a completely random name, kind of a hidden profile with few friends, and I left it. He sent me a friend request a couple of days later. I accepted. Then comes to the day George offers me a lift. I politely decline and say someone else was coming to help. They weren't, and he proceeds to offer help with the car. Any lifts I need in future, etc. Again, I just say thanks and I'll let him know. Fast forward a couple of weeks and my colleague is being off with me. I have no idea what happened, he's not talking to me, our lunch outings stopped. I'm being blanked in the lab, and he won't even make eye contact with me. I confronted him a few days later asking what's wrong. I was honestly worried I'd be drunk at the pub and said something out of line, and then he said to me, "We need to meet outside of work to talk about it." So we pop to a pub at the weekend, and he just sits there and starts with, "I'm so sorry. I'm so upset with myself. Why couldn't I tell?" And then he proceeds to tell me George isn't George at all. He's a convicted predator and had moved down from the north of England to try and escape further grooming and kidnapping charges. He wasn't allowed Facebook as a part of his sentence terms. He had vanished for a few days after offering me a lift, and police came to my colleague's door asking questions. My colleague was so filled with guilt and shame, he didn't realize something was off. I'm sure 20 was too old for this guy, but I'm a 5-foot small woman who is by no means big or strong. I think back to that day a lot and what would have happened if I had accepted the lift, or if any of my friends had just been nice and ended up in a bad situation. Next story. I have a story that's kind of the opposite. My instincts should have been screaming leave now, but I'm so damn stupid I didn't understand what was happening. So I was snowboarding at a resort, and I decided I would take my snowboard off and hike up a mountain to get to some hike-to terrain. It was absolutely dumping snow outside, and I was hiking through about a foot of fresh powder. The entire time I was thinking about how sick it would be to rip some fresh turns down Mount Quail. As soon as I took off, I realized something was terribly wrong. Every turn I took sent down a huge slosh of snow. It was only then that I remembered that the last 2 weeks had been warm and dry. This new snowfall of about a foot of fresh powder had settled on top of that crusty layer, and it was ready to slide at any time. I was all alone in avalanche country in extremely avalanche-prone conditions, and nobody knew where I was. If I'd taken my damn head out of my ass on the hike up there, I'd have realized that something was wrong. Well, I ended up hugging the cliff and very slowly sliding down the mountain on my toe edge. Obviously, it worked out for me. Interestingly, that's not even the worst thing that happened to me up there. Next story. My friend and I were at a party for a few hours. He had an older brother, so we were tasked with getting alcohol for it. We brought some cash, and his brother picked it up for us. We pulled back into the party, and I realized someone was watching the other high school kids from their house through the blinds. I put my car into reverse because it seemed odd, and I didn't want to get blocked into the driveway. Well, as soon as I start the car again, blue lights light up my rearview mirror. 3 cops have showed up to crash the party, and I had $500 worth of alcohol in my trunk. I told the police I was just picking up my friend because he wanted to go home, and they told me to get him and leave. I just waved at the nearest guy, told him the police said I can drive him home, and he got in my car. And we didn't know each other. I think we drank some Zimas too, but everyone else got their alcohol back the next weekend. Still, I was the only person there with alcohol, but several guys got arrested with weed. I can only imagine what I would have gotten into if the cop hadn't let me go. Next story. Oof, I use this story as a warning to my kids as to why you always trust your gut. I, early 20s, was leaving the community college campus I was attending when I noticed a middle-aged, very plump woman walking up to me. She asked me if I was leaving campus, and I responded yes. She then went into a story of how she was at the hospital across the street and was released but doesn't have money for a taxi and asked if I would give her a ride. I quickly said yes. I felt bad for her. It was in the 90s and really hot that day. Now, I have never given a stranger a ride before up until that point, but I didn't feel threatened or uncomfortable by her and honestly thought I was just doing a good deed. Until we were walking to my car, and she started to ask me if I worked and if I was married. Whatever, small talk. Then she got to my car and she notices one of my children's car seats. She asks me where the kids are, and my body instantly tenses up for some reason, and it was weird, and I don't know why. But I responded that they were at daycare, and she asks me who pays for daycare, and my body at this point is tingling, and I ignore it, and I tell her my partner at the time paid for it. Then we get into my car. Now, I had a small two-door hatchback Hyundai Accent, and this woman struggled to get in. She was pretty plump, and this will be important later. She finally gets in, and we start driving. I ask her where she needs to go, and she gives me the street name. It's not far away, but it's in a pretty crappy area of town. I oblige and start that way. This whole time, though, my body is going off like alarm bells inside my head. And I keep side-eyeing her, wondering if she's gonna pull a knife out or something. Stupidly, I never thought about that before letting her in my car. But she kills my overthinking by throwing me off when we're halfway there and asks me, "I don't have AC at home, can I go to your house?" I instantly say that I'm not heading to my house, that I have other things to do. So I sit there quietly the rest of the drive. Meanwhile, my body is experiencing what I assume is a confusion on fight, flight, or fawn because I have no idea what the F to do right now. Then I pull onto her road and she has me pull into an alleyway. I pull over and she opens the passenger door and puts one foot out and acts like she is struggling to get out. She keeps looking ahead of us though, which makes me look up, and I see two men dressed in dark clothes on this sweltering-ass day, and I freeze. I understood at that moment what was going on. She wasn't getting out of the car because these two men were on their way over to us. And this B-word was not getting out of my car, and there was no way I could physically push this bigger woman out. At this point, my body takes over, flight mode kicks in, and I just hit the gas. She rolls out of the car because I kind of jerked the wheel to topple her ass out, and I take off. I truly don't know what was going to happen in that moment, but I wasn't about to hang around and find out. I still find myself helping strangers out though, even with rides, but I've never experienced that feeling since, and I would definitely listen to it next time. Next story. Years ago, I had just moved to a new city alone. About a week in, I was walking home from work at night/early morning when a truck passed me by, very slowly. A few moments later, I realized he made the block and did it again. He did this a few times. I was closer to home by this point and decided I should just make a run for it. But something in me said to just keep walking, which seemed like an idiotic way to respond to a threat, but it worked out in the end because of it. I made it to a stop sign the last time he pulled around, and when he stopped, I leaned in to look him directly in the face and told him, "I see you, I can identify you, F off." By the way, I would never suggest this approach to other women, ever. I'm over 6 feet tall with close combat training, but this was still a huge risk. And when he peeled off around the corner, I dashed to my house. The next morning, after relaying this to some coworkers, they tell me there had been a serial assaulter in that area snatching women up all summer. I called and reported the incident. A detective actually came to see me and got the details, and he warned me not to walk home again, because I fit the profile of his previous victims. And the very next day, he was caught. The detective called me to let me know that the two details, facial hair and vehicle type, that I gave differed from the descriptions from his victims, and those are the details that got him caught. Weird instinct, sure, but it helped catch a vile creature. Next story. Years ago, I lived on a dead-end street. My house had a 4-foot chain link fence around it, about half an acre with a double gate, and I was in the yard when I looked up and saw a pickup driving slowly down the street from the dead end. The fence gates were open. As I watched the truck slowly approach, I had a horrible feeling. My instinct said close the gates immediately. I did, but went back on my porch and stood facing the street because even though I was very afraid, I didn't want to appear that way. Well, the truck stopped and a guy with a mask on his lower face yelled over to me, asking the time. This all made no sense, so I turned and went into the house and locked the door. He sat there for like a minute or so, then drove on. But I really think if I hadn't closed the gates, remained near the road, that I would be dead. Over the years, I've learned to hone and trust my instincts. If it doesn't feel right, it isn't. Next story. I was working on finishing up receptacles in a bank with my boss. There were HVAC and drywall guys there too. They'd brought furniture in, and one of the drywall guys kept settling his dirty, heavy work bag on top of the brand new desk. And this is a huge no-no. If you know, you know. And the GC politely asked him to move his bag. The guy did, but made a huge deal out of it. Then nothing else happened until right before lunch. I started feeling really weird, like hot and itchy all over, my heart rate was through the roof, and I just had to get out of the building. I thought I was having a panic attack, and I asked my boss to come with me. He looked at me strangely, but did. Then the second he and I got out the front door, we saw drywall guy throw a float at GC and start screaming. They had a knockdown, drag-out fight, throwing things inside the tiny bank, smashing each other up against the walls, you name it. Police were called and everything. My boss thanked me and wanted to know how I knew, but I just said I didn't know. I just had a feeling. Next story. The other day, I was driving home from work on a 2-lane highway each way. I'm always in the left lane. I drive fast and I hate semi-trucks. I get anxious being next to them or behind them. But anywho, so I'm driving home and I see a big red light. For some reason, I get out of the left lane and go into the right and sit right behind an effing semi-truck. I have a moment of, why did I do this? Then I look over to the car on my left where I would be sitting, and he gets rear-ended so effing hard. We were making eye contact when it happened. I still can't get over the sound of the cat crunching. Definitely totaled. I was so shaken up the whole way home. That should have been me. Next story. 3 weeks ago, I had minor heart surgery done. I have, or had, pretty severe SVT, so my doctor and cardiologist both highly recommended cardiac ablation to me to treat those palpitation episodes. And both emphasized that it's a super routine procedure, minimally invasive, and only had very low risk of complications, like 1%. They encouraged me that it was better than being on medication my whole life, so I was down and agreed to it. The whole time up to the procedure day, I was excited, really looking forward to being done with SVT. The big day comes around, and I'm doing good and feeling positive until we get in the car and go to the hospital. I had this sudden sinking feeling, this intense feeling of doom. I called it nerves. By the time we get to the hospital and I start the paperwork, my throat feels like it's closing up and I'm visibly shaking. I felt sick, like getting up and running as far away as I could from that place. But I kept reminding myself that it was all good, that this procedure was going to be life-changing in a good way, that it was okay to be nervous. But when it came time to sign off those last papers, I felt like I was signing my death warrant. This felt more than nervous. But anyway, they put me under, get it done, and next thing I know, I'm waking up slowly, painfully, feeling like there's crushing stabby weights in my abdomen and my chest. I can barely get my eyes open and words out. Apparently, it took me 2 hours to wake up after the procedure. My blood pressure had tanked, and the nurse was trying to figure out why. She pressed my stomach, and it was the worst pain I ever felt in my life. Rushed to a scan, and they find that something, possibly an artery according to the surgeon, was nicked, and I had a massive hemorrhage that thankfully had mostly healed on its own by the time they put me into the machine. But I was in the ICU for a few days just to make sure the hemorrhage continued to heal, which it did. But now, after the fact, it definitely seems like my body was warning me with how utterly doomed and panically I felt beforehand. The risk was stupidly low, 1%, yet it happened. So I guess I didn't avoid the danger I felt so strongly. Should I have listened to my gut? Maybe. However, the surgery itself was a success, and so far I have not experienced any violent palpitations, so I guess I have that win in my pocket. Next story. When I was 5 years old, my country was going through a war, and it wasn't uncommon for some kind of explosive or incendiary attack to hit civilian buildings. Then, one day while I was playing in my bedroom, I had a weird feeling that's hard to describe. I guess you could call it impending doom. It felt like my blood had turned cold and my stomach was in knots. I just couldn't fight this inexplicable urge to get out of the room right away. So I got up and walked into the kitchen where my mom was, and when I stepped out of the room, an explosion shattered the windows right above where I had just been playing. Next story. I was in Washington, D.C. for a week-long training session while I was a federal employee. I had planned to stay a few extra days to enjoy visiting monuments and museums and exploring D.C., but I got a weird feeling and decided to fly home without staying the additional days. So I flew home on September 10th, 2001. I would not have been on one of the flights that were hijacked on 9/11, but I would have been stuck in DC for quite some time before I could get home, in a terrifying and chaotic situation. Next story. Was chilling at the bar, made eye contact with older guy. He asked me out of the blue if I have a tracker in my car, and I was so surprised by the question I laughed and asked back, "Do I look like I have a tracker in my car?" Thinking he was asking if I was being tailed by the police or something, and he just deadpan responded, "Yes." And then I realized he was probably trying to see if I was an easy carjacking victim. I finished my drink, then left, and he started following me. I was right by my car and looked over and noticed him just standing there looking forward. Not at me, but the timing was weird. So I slipped around the side of the building and disappeared into the night, chilled at the bar across the street for like half an hour, then brought back up to walk me back to my car, and the dude was gone. Wish I knew what happened to him. Next story. Years ago, I was dating a guy, and he invited me to his mom's birthday in their hometown. We drove out the 3 hours, had a great time at the party, and I was at their house post-party getting ready to go to the local and only hotel. My boyfriend, he was staying at his mom's house. His mom was so nice. She asked if I wouldn't prefer to sleep in a spare room so we could all have breakfast together. I wasn't going to say yes because this was a pretty new relationship and I was shy, but she was so sweet and I agreed. Well, the whole hotel burned down that night and all 12 people in it died. That would have made me casualty number 13. I was in shock. No dramatic feeling preventing me from going, just a kind mom and me getting over my shyness. Next story. Went from pub to another, both pubs were familiar and close to my home, with a group of regular drinking mates. About 6 of us, all up, just another Thursday arvo following the happy hours around. Well, we'd been in the beer garden at the first place, getting absolutely baked as heck, and as we walked through the door of the second pub, less than a block away, everything changed. I felt cold dread like the building was about to collapse on top of us and stopped dead. The only other person in our group who stopped was a small mammal biologist, and we just looked at each other and said, "Do you feel that?" at the same time. This dude was older than me too and tended to be very observant, possibly because his job involved lots of observation. Anyway, the rest of the group was confused by our behavior, and Science Guy and I were initially prepared to accept that we'd become suddenly paranoid on account of all the weed that we smoked, but the feeling got worse when we started looking around the front bar. The atmosphere was scary, creepy, the place had less people in it than usual, and it seemed kinda quiet. Okay, walking into a dead moment at that time of day wasn't unheard of, but Science Guy and I were almost jumping out of our skin. Then went to order a beer and thought the bartender was looking at me strangely. She asked, "Are you alright, mate?" And I was like, "Yeah, it just feels really freaking weird in here, like something just happened or is about to happen. Is anything wrong?" And she looked at me really unfriendly and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you talking like that?" And it was looking like she was going to tell me to leave, so I said, "I don't know, man. Like, I'm not a hippie and I don't believe in psychic bullcrap, but something's really off here. I don't know what's going to happen, but please be careful." And the bartender looked like she was about to belt me. And Science Guy murmured, let's go, right?" And I'm like, "F yeah." And we left our group and went to the next pub, where we discussed the weirdness of it all, and I drank fast and heavily before leaving early and going home. Well, found out a few days later that sometime before we arrived, neo-Nazis had gone to the pub, started a fight, and then left after telling the staff they'd return with reinforcements and destroy the place, so they'd better just shut their doors. Well, the staff decided to keep the pub open and not warn anyone about it. Despite the neo-Nazis being a real threat at the time, the scumbags returned later, probably while I was leaving the other pub, and attacked the place with chains, baseball bats, and clubs. The owner was in a coma for a few days. It was an absolute mess, blood and bodies everywhere. Funny thing was, I had recently shaved off my entire mohawk and just had a tuft of hair at the front. And the freaking staff and regulars, except 1 or 2 regulars who knew me really well, assumed that what I'd said upon walking in that afternoon, plus the fact that I left immediately, obviously meant that I was myself a neo-Nazi who was somehow involved with the attack. I guess they thought my conflict shirt was a cunning disguise, and I had a pretty hard time of it next time I went back there. But fortunately enough, people present on that occasion remembered seeing me stand against neo-Nazis before and take some dangerous risks in doing so, but I still narrowly avoided a beating. Twice. Okay, folks, so I've got to ask you in the comment section, have you guys ever had something like this happen to you? I'm always fascinated by this kind of stuff because you can feel it, and from these stories, it's clearly real, but you can't see it. We can't really scientifically explain it, at least up until a certain degree, but this stuff is just really interests me, so I'm curious if you guys have had any situations. I always try to provide a relevant story, but I don't feel like, at least to my recollection, that I've had an instance like the ones mentioned here in this video, but maybe I'll have one, hopefully I don't. But anyway, folks, thank you all so much for watching, commenting, have a really good day, and bye-bye!